Hello and welcome to Finextra's discussion on meeting FSA's mobile recording regulation. In this part, which is part 2 of the series, we're going to look at making the right technical choices to meet regulation. And with me, I'm Debbie Bell, and with me is Rik Turner. And Rik, I describe you as an independent technology analyst.
Yep, that's fine.
Is that correct?
Yep.
Thank you. We also have in the studio Ryan Shuttleworth. And Ryan, your specialist field is mobile recording.
That's right, so I work for Compliant Phones. I'm the Chief Technology Officer.
That's correct. Thank you. And David Kemp. Now I'm going to get my mouth around this one, but your company specialises in archive, search and supervisory systems.
Exactly. It's part of information governance as a bigger picture.
Thank you. Now mobile recording, it's very complex. Why? Why is it so complex, Ryan?
I think really quite put simply, there's no wires. So with fixed line recording, it's a fairly well understood thing that you can basically plug something into the wires that come into your building. With mobile phones, you've got none of that to deal with. You've got quite complicated technology in terms of the networks and the systems that interoperate. You've got global coverage to think about when your users walk around the world or they go on business trips. And you've got user experience to consider. You know, the high technology out there at the moment, there's a high expectation around the user experience of mobile phones, and impacting that in some way, you know, can be detrimental to the use of them.
I mean, for the lay person, how's it done? How's
it done? It's really about routing calls in some way via something that can record them. Okay, so with fixed line telephony, what happens is that a call comes into your building and there's a recorder box there that picks up that call and records it. And the similar sort of thing has to happen in a mobile network. So we talk about inline mobile recording, about routing your phone call through something that can record the call, and doing that transparently to the end user is what it's all about.
Now, FSA's deadline is November the 14th. Ahead of that deadline, a lot of vendors are coming up in this technology. As a buyer, what do you look for?
I suppose, really, in essence, to be compliant, what you have to do is you must be able to guarantee to the FSA that you are recording all mobile communications, and that's not just voice calls, that's voice but also instant messaging, SMS, any other forms of communication, both to and from that mobile phone. So it's all of the incoming stuff going to that trader on that phone, and all the stuff that then he or she is actually originating from that device. You have to be able to record it, then store it in a searchable and retrievable fashion, because obviously the regulator, when they knock on the door to find out if trader XYZ has been breaking the rules, they want that information to be retrieved in a timely fashion. They don't want to wait a month to find out. And also you have to be able to guarantee that you're recording no matter where that person is. So if they happen to be in the Shanghai office for a week, that needs to be recorded, even though because they're still going to be using their UK mobile phone, and therefore that needs to be recorded, which gets you into all this problem of roaming across different networks and so forth. And equally, if for some reason the recording infrastructure falls over so that you're unable to record those calls, you should really be able to block the calls so that that phone cannot be used. In other words, the calls cannot go ahead if they cannot be recorded.
Right. And Ryan, what advice would you give to a buyer?
What advice would I give to a buyer? I think technically, given the timelines, and something we touched on earlier, it would be to go with something that you can implement very quickly. Yeah, so that means going with something hosted and cloud-based. From a meeting the regulatory perspective that Rik talked about, I think it's all then around the stuff that you put around the recording once you captured it. So putting legal workflows, legal processes around the call recording. And that's why working with people like Automomy, there's a strong need to be able to manage the assets once you collect them, because you're going to collect an awful lot of phone calls. And when the regulator does knock, you need to be able to access them fast and do something with them. So you need to be prepared not just for making the call, recording the call, but it's using it as well, and it often gets sort of forgotten on the end of the chain.
And David, being from Automomy, what would you add to that?
I'd say, in addition to exactly what Rik said, I think there's also a question of anticipation, because it's not just simply whether the regulator chooses to call at a particular point in time, but having the ability to assess across maybe even real-time mobile telephony as to whether the rules of both the institution and the regulator's rules have actually been infringed or not. And the technology now exists to actually carry out that real-time analysis. So that's absolutely critical to the piece.
So overall, as a firm, what should you look for to meet compliance?
I think something that, first of all, has the least user impact, because what will happen is that people won't use the phone, okay, kind of negating the whole argument. So you want people to use mobile telephony. You're sort of using the regulatory pressure as a lever to get your workforce mobile. You then need to look for something that's tamper-proof in terms of you can't stop it working, or that's something that stops the phone call happening if it doesn't work. And then you need to look for something that you can then leverage as compliance officers to use the information to put things on legal hold, for example, and litigation workflows.
I would also add that there's an additional dimension for the actual companies that are deploying the stuff, because while from the FSA's perspective there is, you've got to be compliant, end of story, make sure you are, from the actual companies deploying perspective, there is also the issue that you really don't want to upset all of those prima donna traders. So there is the user experience to be considered, which is critically important. And so you don't want to be deploying technology that then gives them a 5 or 10 second wait or something before they can actually complete that call. And equally, you don't want to upset the people who they are speaking to at the other end, because their interlocutors with whom they are presumably going to be making money will also not be therefore tolerant of delays. So there is also the issue of how painful the user experience is going to become as a result of this technology you are deploying. So you need to think about that as well. And then, of course, if you're a CIO looking to deploy this stuff, you need to be thinking about what the cost of it is. There's going to be a TCO, an ROI, to use our the horrible acronyms, but there is a total cost of ownership issue here. And then I'd also say that, given the exiguity of the actual requirement of November 14th, there's a kind of a day one scenario. Let's get compliant at least to a minimal degree so that we can satisfy the FSA. But there must be also a day two, which is okay. Now we're kind of basic compliant. We're up to basic compliance. Now let's think about how to make this more efficient. Let's think how we might manage to move it out to a cloud solution or whatever, move it on-premise if you prefer. But in other words, you need to think beyond the November the 14th and start thinking about all the data that you're going to be collecting, how you might be able to search it more efficiently, how you might even be able to find other ways of making money based on the fact that you're now recording all of these calls. And that's, I suppose, where the autonomy issue comes in.
Yes, I can see David shaking his head.
Well, exactly. I think there are 2 points. One is not looking at voice in isolation. In the event of perceived delinquency, whistleblower suspicion or whatever, it may well be that actually what you want to do is to analyse across the different media. So it could be the CCTV camera footage of the dealer coming into the room. It could be the voice transmission that has been already captured and therefore comparing it with that. And then thirdly, actually going to the middle office and looking at the confirms and checking the deal itself. And if you like, triangulating those three in order to give a very precise pitch as to whether there has been delinquency or not. The second point is, taking Rik's point, is there is an upside here. Because the gathering of this information, this is all actually still very useful information, maybe in relation to deals, in relation to business intelligence, creating ideas clouds. Imagine in a big dealing room where you've got 200 dealers not actually really talking to each other, they're talking to counterparties. But if by searching into this restored and recovered information, one could actually find out what's happening in the marketplace within your own dealing room, then that actually has a revenue generating opportunity.
And that picks up on the point, because the technology, apart from recording calls and text messages, it does help the compliance officer further, doesn't it?
It does, because what it's doing is ensuring that you have a unified capture alongside with the fixed line and with the other materials. It also means that with the new technology, what that compliance officer can do is take his standard policies, as well as the watch lists of those particular stocks that are of concern, and actually feed that real time against that voice traffic, so that there is an alert, there is an anticipation, there is this early opportunity to be able to say, do you know there's something wrong here? Why are they talking about Enron stock when we shouldn't actually be dealing with it for the next 28 days? That early alert means that you can actually then put the lid on this or actually resolve it. And also the history of the FSA fines and sanctions over the last 18 months has been reductions in fines by up to 30%, where one has taken swift and appropriate action to resolve an issue and then reporting it.
And looking ahead, how do you see this mobile recording technology developing in the future?
Well, my opinion is that increasingly it will move into some form of cloud delivery.
What do you mean by that?
By that I mean that it won't be reliant on any infrastructure necessarily being on premise, on the bank's premises, on the trading floor or in their data centre or whatever. I think increasingly it will be delivered by a service provider who may be a dedicated service provider that only does this, or quite likely it may also be one of the big mobile operators themselves. Now there are issues about whether or not that will then tie you into only going with that particular provider because you're so deeply involved with them and they're holding all of your mobile recordings. That's a different issue. But nonetheless, it makes an awful lot of sense if mobile recording could just become literally a box that you could tick so that X number of your employees needed to be recorded and then the others just didn't. So you didn't tick it for those guys. And the operator could then just look at the contract and say, OK, we record this lot, but not that lot. That would be the most logical way to go.
And Ryan, I see you nodding. Your thoughts on the
future?
Well,
yeah, I mean, from a technology perspective, there's quite a range of ways in which you can do this, and I think that they will converge. There's some dubious sort of solutions out there, and there are some more robust solutions, and they'll converge into what Rik's saying, which is, I think, a cloud-based platform. That platform needs to be able to handle all the different ways that you can do it today, and it needs to accommodate the way you're going to do it in the future. Some of that will be network leveraged, i.e. provided by network operators. But then you need to start considering, well, there is a convergence around these sort of telephony technologies. There's no point just having mobile phone recording off on an island, because what you want to do is to have your desk phone ringing, your mobile phone ringing, your trading turret services transportable, and all of that needs to be compliant. So I think where this ultimately goes is that the mobile phones as capture devices become just that. It then all becomes about the story around the platform that you put around it in the future, and that's where this technology will go.
Right. Now, just as we come to a close, briefly, could you each give a recommendation to a firm that perhaps hasn't made a decision on their technology yet? What about you, David?
I'd say this doesn't have to be a full bells and whistles approach, but it has to be a minimum level of compliance with the regulation. They should take the date of the 14th of November extremely seriously. And they must make sure that they have actions underway in terms of installing the necessary recording equipment. Also, I would suggest make the most of what you have already, because bear in mind, this is one additional medium of communication which is being added to all the others. So let's maybe don't get too overexcited about it, but just make sure you comply by putting it alongside the other media.
Right, Ryan?
For me, it would be take a technology solution that doesn't change your working practices today.
Right.
So if you've got a BlackBerry estate, take something that works with a BlackBerry estate. If you've got certain processes in your compliance team, take something that's going to allow those to operate in the same way. And I think for me that means taking a sort of a hosted package that's been designed specifically for that.
And Rik?
I would say definitely take the staged approach. Work with your friendly neighbourhood FSA official to make sure you're compliant in time for November 14th. Don't get tied in to anything that doesn't have a technology roadmap for the future. So don't get tied into any kind of a silo or a cul-de-sac that you can't move out of in a year's time. And once, from November the 15th, effectively onwards, then think about a more long-term strategic approach to actually move onto a platform that enables you to use that, all the stuff that you're recording, and get multiple benefits out of it.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us as part of this Finextra discussion. And I just want to remind you out there that if you haven't watched the part 1 that we did a little earlier, do so, because that focuses more on the compliance officer as well. And as you've just heard, we've been looking at technology. So thank you ahead of November the 14th. Thank you.